Welcome in to the Energy Tech Podcast presented by OpSite Energy. Today we're talking about why small midstream companies are rethinking their control room and what comes next. I'm joined today by my esteemed co-host, Michael Flores. Welcome in, Mike.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be here. I am your co-host. I'm Mike Flores, part of the Energy Tech Podcast. So, yeah, Jeff, I think here we've got something to talk about. Today's topic is something kind of we're seeing more and more of, right? Across the midstream sector, and we're going to talk about how companies are rethinking the old model of building and running their own control rooms, right? From old to new. So there's a lot of rethink going on in the industry, right?
Yeah. So before we do that, Mike, I know you like to always check in on the Canonsburg weather. It's actually been really nice. It's May 2nd. Is today the 2nd of May already?
Yeah.
OpSite is up and running, guys. Brian is on the booth. Brian, could you give us a live feed of that control room? Let's just take a look at what we're looking at. All right, there. See, we got a live control room going, guys.
Control room's up and operational.
4 full-time desks there.
Yeah.
Video walls a little bit out of commission right now due to a firewall and a static IP issue. But yeah, go back to us, Brian. But there we are.
There we go. Yeah, and it's good to have Brian on the board. So in case folks don't know, Brian isn't just our podcast producer, but he also runs the control room, sits in as an expert in the control room as managing and leading the teams there. So good to have you, Brian. I'm sure even from behind the booth, you can give us a little insight. So we're looking forward to that, man, bringing you in. So don't worry if we talk about it, we bring you right in. It's because I think you're coming from a position of expertise.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
And he's a natural on the board. He's a guy that's been in a band for like 30 years. He's got 5 studio albums. These guys, they know how to run audio equipment. So it was just, hey, man, you're easy. You're going to jump on this booth with us. So anyways, Mike, today we're going to jump in the Energy Tech Podcast. And those who haven't tuned in before, basically this is where we dive into technology shaping the future of remote operations, okay? And that could be just in that room we just showed, but it could also be in the field with, edge devices, things like that. But ultimately, Mike, a lot of midstream operators are realizing that the traditional approach isn't just super expensive, it's outdated for the way that we operate today, right? So we're going to break it down for you in this episode and why the shift is happening, what the real pain points are, and what do the smarter options look like?
Yeah, so, Jeff, let's start with the basics first, right? So traditionally, a company would invest millions of bucks in their building, right? In building their own control room space. Sometimes it's bare metal equipment, let's say servers. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we are talking about some cloud-based stuff. Staffing 24/7 shifts, which can be unique because you have to have a unique type of operator, right, that works that 24/7 shift. Then you have to accommodate specific shifting. Then you've got the challenges of cybersecurity and data, right, surrounding your organization on the midstream side, production side, whatever it is. And then you have to have backup systems for that.
Right.
So that's always a piece. And then you have to, and not only that, but you have to consider the second footprint, which is the backup control room, right? So,
well, technically, yes. I hope that's not the case going forward.
Right.
As technology changes, the rules, regulations, procedures, the way we handle things should also change, right? So, what you're saying makes sense. What made sense 10, 15 years ago when technology options were limited is not always going to make sense today, right? And so back then, if you wanted real-time control, you had to do it all yourself, right? You had to stand up these huge servers. You had to stand up your room. You had to hire the staffing. And today, it's a completely different world just due to the advent of new technologies, cloud space, cloud computing, things like that, right?
Yeah, so exactly. So you have now, Jeff, when you step back and look, here we are, 2025, right? We've got cloud computing and cloud connectivity, which is driving that. You've got data center-centric storage capabilities. You've got lots of secure remote operations, managed services. So technology has moved forward. But if you're running a control room, and if it's, we'll use the word like PHMSA compliant, if it fits in that compliance model with a midstream company, which a lot of times it does, if you're moving, liquids or gas, then what happens is that you read that PHMSA document, and the last update was 2019, right? And that was only for compliance issues, not technology. Right. So it's not matching, right?
Right, and PHMSA is not, they're not really worried about technology and optimization. They're really worried about compliance, and that's it. And if you go back and you look at control rooms from 40, 50 years ago, they weren't PHMSA control rooms. They were nuclear plants that obviously they had a huge budget. They had to connect everything locally, real time. But even nowadays, nuclear power plants are changing the way they do control too. So PHMSA is a little behind the ball as far as looking at how technology changes the regulations and the rules, and how do we make sure these things are safe, because they inherently are much more safe anyway.
Well, not just that, Jeff. Talk about costs, because I don't think the costs are aligned anymore when you talk about old style control rooms, right?
Yeah. So the in most cases, you're talking millions to kind of get started, to stand up. And that's before you even consider costs like staffing, updates, compliance people, things like that.
Right.
And that doesn't always make sense, especially for the smaller, midstream type operators, which is what we're going to focus on today. So when we're talking about small midstream operators, these are most likely non-public companies, private midstream companies. There was an explosion of these types of companies about 15 years ago, especially with the way people were doing subsidiaries and spinoffs and kind of some strange, funny money type things. But you end up with smaller organizations with a smaller asset footprint that really it doesn't make sense to staff a full body in the control room, because a full body requires actually 5 bodies, right? From a PHMSA perspective, because it's 24 hours a day. You got shifts on and off. There's only so many hours a day you can work. Right. So you're at 4 people right there, and then past that, if you want them to have a vacation or any kind of life, you got to hire another guy to kind of fill the gap. So, from an hours of service standpoint, but
and that's not just that, Jeff. You're I get it. We're going to hit on these costs, especially when we're talking about a control room of space. But there's these other costs involved, and what I mean by that is regulatory requirements require to have. A lot of times they don't require, but it's in the mindset to have consultants. So guess what? You're going to pay for someone to tell you that you need a control room. You're going to pay for somebody to tell you that you have to have a workload study, right? A workload. You're going to pay somebody that may come in and clean up alarms, or you're going to pay what I call a consulting ecosystem that are costs associated with just getting your control room up and running.
Yeah.
Right. So those also play a part in this, right?
So let's just, I want to hone in on four items there, and you mentioned a few of them. But what's driving the change, and what would drive it for a smaller midstream company is really, it boils down to 4 things, and we'll break those down really quickly. So regulatory pressure, right? So PHMSA compliance is serious, not just for the big boys, but all the way down to the guy who has 6 miles of pipe and 1 little compressor, right? It's the same compliance standard. You got to have the same manuals. You got to do the same checkouts. Just the volume may be lower, but regulatory pressure is a big deal. Alarm management programs, incident response plans, these are all tied to your control room, right? And that's where you're mentioning, hey, you might be spending money that you don't realize because you got consultants doing XYZ on the regulatory front,
right? Or
maybe you're paying a consultant to rationalize your alarm set in one time, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So those are costs that are built in there, and then kind of. You're right, Jeff. I mean, there's a lot of additional costs that they're not built in, but you're going to consider them and they're going to come up.
Right. So number 2, this is somewhat new when you think about the vintage of the PHMSA regulatory, update, is cybersecurity threats, right? So the cybersecurity landscape and the threats around cyber are not the same as they were 10 years ago, and definitely not the same as they were 20 years ago. So today, SCADA systems with no cybersecurity protections is a huge risk, not just from hey, I got hacked and I lost my, social security numbers, but hey, I got hacked and someone controlled my pipeline.
Yeah.
Right. So huge deal.
And then what's underneath that, Jeff, is the reputational damage, right? So this is where you consider risk. And point number 2 on the cybersecurity threats is it's not just the system. It's if we let's say we don't spend the money to do this, or we don't, make this a consideration in terms of shutdowns, what's the reputational damage?
Yeah, man, that's a cost, huge cost, right?
Yeah, so that's a big one right there.
So number 3, Mike, I think, we just stood up a control room. I can tell you this is something that is a challenge, not just here, but I've got a lot of peers in the industry, people that used to work with us, et cetera, that are also managing control rooms, but staffing challenges have been a nightmare. One of the reasons I love working up in Canonsburg is The staffing challenges, even though it's hard to find qualified folks, but if I'm in the Houston market, now I'm competing against 12, 13, 14 control rooms. I'm competing against Exxon, Chevron, Citgo, and then the private control rooms like Everline, et cetera. And you get to where a qualified senior guy is in the $70 an hour range in Houston, Texas. Not saying they're not worth that, but
Right.
that's quite a bit of money, especially when you're paying mandatory overtime and things like that. That's more than a vet salary. So when you're looking at staffing, it can be difficult. And the staffing and the level of staffing you have to hire is directly related to the level of technology you deploy in your control room. So at OpSite, what we're trying to do is deploy the technology side in lieu of the $70 operator. And it would be our goal to find quality people that, have a little bit of an education, that also have a good work ethic and are willing to learn, that can apply the technology principles. I don't need a $70 an hour, 30-year hand. I can do it with someone who's got 3 years of experience and knowledge and do a really good job. So
Right. And I think too, when you think about the staffing challenge, you said it. So Houston's the mecca for operators. I think a lot of these producers and operators, they want to be close. But what we're learning when we talk about this rethinking is that a CEO of a Houston-based oil and gas producer doesn't walk in the control room to get his operational view every day.
no,
He's not
absolutely
doing
not.
that. They're looking at operations dashboard. They might be looking at operational data that sometimes is not in real time. My point is that when you start rethinking the control room, you have to get away from the idea that I have a staffing challenge in Houston because that's the place where someone goes to look. And that's just not happening anymore.
Right.
Not in 2025. Right.
And then there are markets that still have qualified good folks. I love San Antonio. I love the market there. One of our competitors is there. There's a lot of public type control rooms like the water system, et cetera, where you find really good controllers who know how to handle a liquid pipeline. It just happens to have water in it. And typically the price point for those employees is much lower because they've been paid so low during their career, but you basically had someone pay for their training. So there's some other good markets. I like Canonsburg as well. We've got a really good staff here. At OpSite, our average tenure on the desk is like 7 years, right? And then our average industry experience is in the, almost 15 years. And this is across 20 folks. So we're really proud of the group that we were able to retain here as we did this startup. But let's talk about the last one, Mike. And this, again, specific to smaller midstream companies. The last one I really want to talk about is flexibility. So when you got the big Exxon control room and Chevron and those guys buy assets, they sell assets, obviously, but they're, these smaller midstream companies, they are like churning assets. Some of them are set up just to own the asset for several years, to get a book of business, to make the balance sheet correct, and then they're offloading it, right? So it would never make sense for them if they, these companies to go build a control room from scratch in 2 years, they need to sell it or it's part of the asset divestiture. So third-party control rooms can really come in and fill the gap where flexibility is needed because your operation changes so much.
Right. So you're going to spin up this large-scale AFE dedicated to a control room expense that's a sunk cost over what could be maybe only a 2-year period, because this is in the long run, this is an M&A, a merger and acquisition type of situation where we've got this, we stood it up. We've added partners on this pipeline. We've added capacity. We're doing well, and now it's spun off or sold off or merged or it's acquired. Hey, this is a great deal, and so typically you've got a lot of sunk cost in there for what could be a 2-year stretch, and it could be 1.2, 1 point, whatever those millions of dollars are, right? So you're right. I think you have to rethink that, right? That's the traditional way of doing that.
Yeah. So ultimately, we think about what are the smarter approaches now, right? And it is partnering with companies like OpSite Energy. Folks have already built the infrastructure, already have the compliance framework in place, already have those trained operators that you're not having to go spend time and money looking for, and we provide this as a service, right?
Right. And so let me say this. You're right. But a lot of companies that have a traditional control room, they realize too late that they're spending time and money on control room operations when they should be focused on their core business, production, throughput, maintenance, markets, that's their core business. Right. Yeah.
And that's where you want to spend your core amount of time, right? So the other thing with the cost that, depending on the organization, even small mission companies, you got silos in different organizations, but, when we talk about like hiring that operator, well, you think, okay, well, I'll give this to a recruiter, I'll give this to HR, whoever,
Right.
It's just not my issue. But lo and behold, they go spend the next month and they spend hours and hours and hours in doing that. And like, no one's really capturing that cost or that time. And I think these things kind of add up in the background where you're focused on a regulatory. Hey, we know we got to do X, Y, Z. We got to check this box for PHMSA.
Right.
You're right. You're not checking the box for optimization and how do I use this control room, because it's seen as, hey, it's a cost of doing business. It's something we got to have. It's a necessary evil, whatever you want to call it, and we got to comply.
Right.
But that's just step one. That's the start, right?
Right.
That's just to get in business. That's what OpSite does. That's what other guys do. But where OpSite and some of these third-party control rooms, I don't know if anyone really is in going the direction we are, but where we are is that's day one, right? That's got to be ready to go. We set up a customer portal for you. You feel good about the regulatory piece. We're there to support you during audits. Past that, we want to take what we can of yours and optimize it too.
Right. So Jeff, we talked about these 4 topics. What's the best way forward then, right? I mean, am I hearing what you're saying is, hey, what's the smart approach now? Like okay, you're doing this traditionally. You partner with OpSite. What do you get? Right.
Yeah, so
what are we getting here?
If you partner with someone like OpSite, instead of owning a control room, you're just plugging into it, right? So you get to 24/7 monitoring. Okay,
Right.
You get alarm response, you get real-time SCADA control, all for a fraction of the cost that you would be getting if you did this for yourself, and probably a much quicker. So.
Right.
If you're someone who's the project manager, we got a pipeline coming. This happens, right? Long pipeline. Oh, by the way, we want to control it. It's kind of like, it takes more than a couple months to set something like that up, especially if you're having to hire and things like that. But really, it's an easy button for you. But past the easy button of regulatory compliance and things like that, I think OpSite is going to go another level past our competitors as far as giving you insights into what's happening, insights into alarm rationalization, places where you can change your alarm sets to work better for you and better for your goals, not just to check a box for PHMSA.
Yeah, and so you said something that I use the word our competitors, only because I've worked in them. Our competitors do what's called floor level services. Floor level services are things like, we're going to do enough so you pass a PHMSA audit. That's what we're going to do. If it means, just monitoring your alarms, if it means, hey, we're just going to check the box for this, or we're going to provide training for X and we're going to monitor, then that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about is something you actually plug into that is 24/7 monitoring, that is true AI and alarming and real-time control. I think the other thing too is that our competitors are leveraging older, outdated paywall systems for a fact. These guys are leveraging ClearSCADA. They're leveraging Wonderware. They're leveraging some Aviva platforms. They're using old school tech pieces that can no longer integrate, are no longer open source. They don't have the capability to do something. So if I'm an operator with an M&A scenario, then I can't just plug in. Why? Because if I go to this our competitor, what's going to happen is I got to play with their paywall system. That's what they do. So they want you to buy into their ClearSCADA system so that you'll do it there. Now you're stuck with a licensing cost, right? A contractual licensing cost where you don't have that, where we might leverage a platform like Ignition that doesn't require that and could care less about the total number of tags that you bring in. Right. So those are the things that you really got to look at. If we're truly talking about plugging into a system that's available to you, if you're in a scenario where, you want to have a control room, you don't want to sink those costs, but you also don't want to have your M&A's, a 2-year lookout. Well, if I'm on a 2-year lookout, I probably want a system that's I can plug into, I can still get all the same compliance, and I get more than that, then why wouldn't I do that?
Right.
You know?
Right. I mean, so with those 4 key attributes, thinking about those things, bottom line is, the control room's not going away anytime soon.
Right.
I do believe the way midstream companies think about it is changing.
Right.
I believe it won't be long before the way PHMSA looks at this, someone will have to look at this and how AI has changed the game as far as alarm rationalization, what makes sense. Who knows? At some point, it may be a requirement to use AI to rationalize your alarm set. So we're looking at that. But if you're someone out there who has a project coming or currently has one and currently you're staffing your own, or maybe you're even using another third-party control room that you're just not happy with, or you feel like just ultimately that the control room is a burden, or you're planning any kind of growth and you don't want that burdensome anchor, I think it's time to rethink your approach.
Yeah, it's time to rethink it and start thinking about scalability, start thinking about real compliance, coming in with someone like OpSite that's already scalable, secure, SOC 2 compliant, PHMSA compliant, has layered cybersecurity practice, already has things figured out for you so you can plug in quickly and we can stand something up with the operational experience.
Right.
I think it's a big deal. So if you're starting to feel like, hey, your control room's a burden, right? If you are planning and you don't want to anchor yourself because your lookout might be short, or you really want to consider it and consider the planning, I think we could be part of that approach for sure.
Yeah, and you're definitely getting some high dollar folks right here in front of you that it can help you out. So those are people you don't have to put on your staff. But again, like Mike said, if you want to learn more about how we can help at OpSite Energy, whether you're trying to get staffed or looking to upgrade, or maybe you just need someone to come help you build a control room or do your alarm rationalization. It's not just that we want everyone here. We want everyone to do things at a high level too. So we'll work with other operators. We'll come in and help you out there too. But go to opsiteenergy.com, guys. Again, if you like the show, if you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe or follow us on YouTube. We're also on Spotify now, Apple, and Podbean too. So find your podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Mike?
Let OpSite help you rethink your challenge and your control room. That's what we want to do. We want to help you rethink it. That's it.
Thank you for listening, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Till next time.
Thanks for joining us.